Hello, dear students. Today we will start our second lecture of GUID 311E. Last lecture we talked about the 18th dynasty and how Egypt prospered during this period. Today we will continue with the first king of the 19th dynasty. King Ramses I, who is actually linked closely with King Hur-Imheb, the last king of the 18th dynasty. However, as we discussed last lecture, King Hur-Imheb is sometimes considered the founder of the 19th dynasty, or at least the godfather, if we can say, for the kings of the 19th dynasty. The reason for that is that Hur-Imheb was no military man. He was no royal man, he was a military man and he had no royal blood. However, he ascended the throne of Egypt as we discussed in our last lecture. However, he also was pretty old when he ascended the throne. He had no male heir or no heir at all, and therefore he needed somebody to be considered an heir or a crown prince. This man was a young man called Pi-Misu. And Pi-Misu or Pi-Ramisu was actually a young man at the beginning of his life. By the end of the life of Hur-Imheb, was quite an old man. He started his career as an army officer. He was promoted in the army to the rank of the commander-in-chief of the army under King Hur-Imheb. Apparently, King Hur-Imheb favored Pi-Ramisu, and he wanted him to be the man he trusted more and more. Therefore, he gave him an important title. This title was the title of Repati. The title of Repati tells us that this man was in fact the crown prince. Here is Pi-Ramisu as a scribe. The scribe is an important position, and apparently he also favored the way he would present it as a scribe. However, we were saying that he held the title Repati, which actually is usually given to the person who will ascend the throne after the king. He also held several titles. The most important of them is also a title of the vizier of Hur-Imheb. So we can see now that he held quite a few important titles: commander-in-chief of the army, vizier, Repati, in addition to being a scribe and being many other jobs. Therefore, when Hur-Imheb finally died, Pi-Ramisu would ascend the throne as an old man already. Let's see when he will ascend the throne, what will happen. We mentioned the beginning of the dynasty and how strange things were due to lack of somebody with a royal blood. Another complication would be that Pi-Ramisu comes from a place at the eastern delta, the city of Avaris. The city of Avaris is the capital of the Hyksos. It is today in Sharqiya province in the eastern delta. As you probably remember, when we studied, Avaris was also the center of the worship of the god Seth. Well, that complicates things with a lot of people in Egypt considering the god Seth as an evil associated god, if we don't say an evil god. However, we will see how this will affect the history of the whole dynasty. King Pi-Ramisu will change his name very shortly after he ascends the throne and would call himself Ra-Mes-Su. As we see in his cartouche, his name is Ra-Mes-Su Men Pehti Ra. These are the titles, the names that he will take very early in his life as a king. Well, the old man who became the king of Egypt all of a sudden, he had quite a simple background. His father was a commander in the army called a man called Seti. Now, history will tell us about these two names, Seti and Ramses, because a couple of kings in the dynasty will be called Seti, and another 10 kings will be called Ramses. So we have from Ramses the first, 10 other Ramses, until we reach to Ramses 11th by the end of the 20th dynasty. So dynasties 19 and 20 will considered the Ramesside period. Now, we move from this man being noble, a vizier, a scribe, a commander-in-chief, to him being king. We actually have very few achievements done by this king because he actually ruled for a year and a half around this time. So he didn't have much time to do many things. However, he did quite a few important things in this short period of time. He actually reopened the mines of the turquoise. He also did some buildings or completed some buildings, or at least participated in some building. We can mention the second pylon at Karnak that was already started by Horemheb. He actually added to the second pylon. He didn't live long to add much, but he also reached in Nubia until the place of Buhin, and he built some scattered buildings all around Egypt. A short life that led to death, and this death would be the reason why his tomb is considered probably the smallest tomb or one of the smallest tombs in the Valley of the Kings. As you see here, the plan of the tomb show a very, very steep end to the tomb, a broader area, and a one room with a sarcophagus. This tomb was discovered by Belzoni in 1817. When he entered it, he found a broken sarcophagus and just a few other artifacts. The mummy of the king was not there. Here is a picture of the beautiful tomb of the king. Very small, very short life for the king as a king. Therefore, he had no time to decorate it with carvings. So only paintings on the walls, but very beautiful colors, so fresh as if they were painted yesterday. Let's see here a gray, bluish gray background, the pictures of the king in front of the gods, and very interesting scenes from a book called the Book of the Gates. All right, now we have a problem. Where is the mummy of Ramses I? Actually, nobody found it until recently, when the Museum of Niagara Falls decided to sell its collection. When they decided to sell its collection, another museum offered to buy this collection, and they decided to make the proper investigation. When they made the proper investigation, they realized that this must be a royal mummy. The arms crossed on the chest, and actually they could not help but noticing the resemblance in the face with the face of King Seti I. Therefore, they made some tests, some examination. They actually did DNA analysis, a lot of things, and x-rays that will help them identify who that person is. Here is the German Egyptologist who did this, and as you see, he is examining the mummy at Niagara Falls Museum when they suspected that this is a royal mummy. The two main things that helped them was the MRI or the CT actually that they made for the mummy to help them identify the resemblance with other royal mummies. Also a DNA analysis, as we mentioned, in addition to other analysis. Here is the head of the king that, as I mentioned, shows great resemblance to King Seti the First. Let's see here, another test was done, or another thing was done by X-ray. And the X-ray shows us the details of the body. They could identify an old man in this picture. And finally, we see here a comparison between the mummy itself, the X-ray of the mummy, and the CT of the mummy, that all proved to be the mummy of Ramses the First. Now, why was it found at the Niagara Falls Museum? What took it all this way? It's interesting that Egyptologists believe now that the mummy originally was moved to the cachette of Deir el-Bahari, DB 320. As you remember, we mentioned in our previous courses that the family of Abd al-Rasul did find this cachette. They actually find it before the authorities could know about it. They kept it secret for quite some time. We don't know for how long. A little bit of smuggling took place. They started to bring a piece after another to sell it in the market. The authorities realized that there are new artifacts in the market in Luxor, and they started to investigate the matter. This is when the family of Abd al-Rasul decided to tell the story that they discovered something when the goat of one of them fell into a hole, and they were trying to help her, and they discovered the tomb. This turned out to be one of the royal mummy cachettes that the Egyptian priests during the 21st dynasty used to store the mummies of the kings of that were buried in Thebes, in the Valley of the Kings mostly. Therefore, we believe nowadays that this mummy probably was smuggled during the period before the official discovery of the cachette, and ended up somehow at the Museum of Niagara Falls. Interestingly enough, the negotiations with the Egyptian government, the mummy was returned to the Egyptian Museum, where it is on display today in the mummy's room in the Egyptian Museum. It will be moved soon to the Museum of Ancient Egyptian Civilization. We come to the end of our lecture, and we will discuss in our lecture the next time. We will talk about Seti the First, and we will be discussing the life and the reign of the son of Ramses the First, and that is in our next lecture. Thank you very much, and see you in the next lecture.
Hello, dear students, and welcome to our third lecture of GUID 311E. In this lecture, we will be talking about the great king Seti the First. We talked in our last lecture about his father, Ramses the First. We mentioned that his grandfather, the grandfather of Seti the First, was an army commander called Seti. So actually, our great king is named after his grandfather, which is a common Egyptian thing in ancient and actually in modern times. And our king Seti the First will give us so much to talk about. Let's start and see how he started his career. First of all, these are some links that you can use. No one link is enough, and no one link is perfect. In addition, of course, to your work, I highly recommend that you to use the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt, as it is quite a reliable source. Now, let's see King Seti the First. Remember in our last lecture, what did we say about the origins of the family? We mentioned that they came from Avaris, a city that worshipped as a main god the god Seth. The god Seth. As you probably will notice, that Seti is named after Seth, the one who belongs to Seth. If you look in his name, you will always find, not always, but you will often find that the god Seth is shown here, and then the two letters representing the sound I, or the two signs representing the sound I. So city, and then he adds, of course, Marie and Amen, beloved of Anna. We must notice that this is the birth name of the king, or the Sarah name of the king. However, sometimes we see it differently. We see instead of Set, we see another god. Sometimes we see Petah, sometimes we even see Osiris, probably for religious and political reasons. However, we must know that also the Nusubiti name of this king. We are not required to memorize all names of kings, all Nusubiti names, but some kings we must, like Seti the first, for example. As you see here, we have his name as Men Might Ra. And as you see over there, you see that King Seti ruled Egypt from 1294 to 1279 BC. This date is debatable. He ruled somehow between 11 to 17 years. However, quite a few Egyptologists disagree on this. Alright, so here we see Men Matra, Seti, Meri, and Petah, or sometimes Seti, Meri, and Imen. So also Imen here is sometimes changed with Petah. These are the names of this great king. Mike shows the statue, a famous statue of the king, a beautiful master statue of the king. However, we will talk later during our lecture much about the art and architecture of this great king. Let's see. All right. Here, last lecture, remember we were talking about how Egyptologists identified the mummy of Seti. They identified it by noticing the resemblance with Seti the first. We also will notice here that the family keeps that features, the nose, the pointy nose, and the pointy chin, and the small head. As you see here, we have a mummy of Seti the first. It looks so much like that of Ramses the first. Also his son, Ramses the second, will have the same features, and Meneptah will have the same features, much resemblance between the three kings. So now we have the three kings that would follow King Ramses the first. Let's see. Now, King Seti starts his life, a young man and with great ambition. He actually will start by doing some wars early in his life. We will see a map in a little while showing us the route, one of the routes that he took in one of his expeditions. His first expeditions were to what we call today the land to the east of Egypt. We can call it the Levant, as it includes several countries. And here we see the great king on the outside of the walls of the hypostyle wall at Karnak. We see unchariot, and we notice something happened in the Egyptian art after the Amarna period. There is now more movement, more motion, so the king is looking backwards, which is something we didn't notice in the art before Amarna period. Let's see the route that he took in his northern Palestine trip. As you see, he actually moved from Tanis, which is near Paris. This is here at the side. We will talk during our next lecture about the difference between Tanis, Paris, and the cities in the eastern delta. They are nearby each other, but they are not the same. Here we go. We see the king moving to the fortress of Sai, moving to Rafah, today's at the border of Egypt and Israel, then Gaza, and then continue to Megiddo and do these wars towards Kadesh and Sidon, and all the way to the northern part in Syria. Here we go, we see the king here trying to gain control and continue the expeditions of the 18th dynasty. That early in his year, details of this battle are interesting, full of interesting details of the life and the king as a military man. Now, this man in his wars, he would get a lot of booty and he would add to the wealth of the empire. Not only that, he was so ambitious, he wants to build, he wants to do more wars, so several campaigns, and he needed gold for that reason. It is interesting. Now, this is the world oldest map, the map of the gold mines, one map of the gold mines that were sent. As you see that the map itself, you can see here the route, we have a description of the route, we have even part of the map that shows the well that was dug for the people that were meant to drink. We also have the names of the station and description of them. So apparently, King Seti I exploited the eastern desert gold mines to have more gold to spend on his expeditions and on the building activities. In addition, of course, to the great booties that added to the wealth of the nation. Now, we will see a different type of art. If you open any book of history or any book of art, you will see that the part of Seti art is always the biggest. Why is that? We will notice when we discuss art that there is different types of reliefs. Here we go. We see, for example, a raised relief that is so fine that it's only a few millimeters raised lower. This, of course, requires high skill and accuracy. We see, of course, the beautiful colors here on the face of the king from his tomb at the Valley of the Kings. Now, what does art has to do with him being a great king? As we discussed many times, art is only telling the truth. Art is the reflection of the society, as they say. So when you see fine art, it's an indication that this kingdom is stable, is wealthy, is rich, and it has the luxury to make fine, beautiful art. Here we see another picture of the king being blessed by the gods of wood, and we see beautiful details on his body and on his costume. Now, these pictures are from his temple, especially his temple at Abydos. We will see pictures of the temple again very soon, and we see the great magnificent work of the king in his temple. However, here we notice that the king, again, the fine reliefs, the beautiful colors, when he's opening the shrine of one of the gods, as we will see how many gods are worshipped in his temple. Oh, you see the beauty here, and also a goddess blessing him. Now, the king built so many buildings and magnificent buildings. I will start by the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, which he actually almost totally built. He would not have the time to decorate it fully, so he will only decorate the northern part of the hall. He will leave the southern part of the hall for his son Ramses II to complete. What a magnificent building is considered one of the most beautiful things to see, not only while in Egypt but all around the world, the great hypostyle hall at Karnak. We also was mentioning, and we were talking about his temple at Abydos. We will discuss in archaeology how during the New Kingdom there was not just a funerary temple for the king, but there is something that is called temples of millions of years. In short, they are temples to commemorate the life of the king, to be dedicated to the gods and to himself, and to be worshipped in it for eternity. Here is the beautiful temple of Seti I at Abydos. There used to be two open halls, however, they are mostly destroyed, but the hypostyle halls and the rest of the temple tells us how a magnificent place this is and this was. Now, as you see, there are many entrances, not just one entrance for the temple. There is a central entrance and other entrances right and left. This is because the temple was dedicated to 7 gods. This is here another picture that shows the 7 sanctuaries. One sanctuary for Seti himself to the far left of our, from the angle where we are, and then we have Ptah, Rah, Rafti. Amun is definitely the central sanctuary, and then we have Osiris, Isis, and Horus. All these gods are worshipped together in one temple, 7 sanctuaries. This is unique. And when we think about it, why did Seti do that? Well, I actually think that being of a background associated with the god Seth, his main god, and the god of the city where he comes from, Abeer, puts some pressure on the king to prove that he also respects other gods. It is my idea about the explanation why is that, because he made sure that the god Ptah, the god Rah-Rafti, and the god Amun, as well as the Osirian triad, are all worshipped. And remember, Osiris is the main enemy of the god Seth. Therefore, the temple choice of the location itself, or the choice of the location of the temple, is another indication of what I'm suggesting. The choice of the site of Abydos, where the god Osiris was strongly worshipped, and where the Egyptians believed that the head of Osiris was found there. And therefore, this temple was built to worship the god Osiris together with the other gods. Now, this is the temple that has the best art of the period. Right? We will see one part of the temple that is known as the King's List. So, in this magnificent temple, it's huge in size, and also it has many special things. One of them is the King's List. Remember when we were studying in the early days of our history, we were studying what we used to know the kings and who told us about the king. One of the sources that told us about that were King's List, and one of the lists that we studied was the King's List of Abydos, where we see King Seti the First, now with his son and heir to the throne, who will succeed him as Ramses II. We see that the young prince, has a papyrus scroll, and he's reciting the names of the ancestors. The first name in the list will be the name of King Mena, and then it follows with kings of the Old Kingdom, of the Middle Kingdom, and of the 18th dynasty, with omission of the kings of the Amarna period. All of them will be moved from this list, as well as Hatshepsut. They will be considered illegitimate, and they are not included in such list. The last row will include cartouches of the same king, Seti, 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 Seti. All his name will be repeated, his birth name and his Nisubiti name and his Sarah name, both of them. Okay? So, this is another picture showing us all the kings mentioned here. You notice here the names of Seti and all the kings, starting by Mena and ending by Ramses I. Just outside this temple lies another temple. Is known today as the Osirian. The Osirian is lower than the ground level. It's a little bit lower, and it's meant to indicate the kingdom of Osiris. We discussed in our earlier courses what the ancient Egyptians thought of the kingdom of Osiris. They thought of it that it is under the ground, that is an island surrounded by water. So actually water is brought through a tube here to bring water to surround parts of the building. It is built with beautiful blocks here, and it is a magnificent temple with funerary texts on the walls. Again, this is done to prove to the people of Egypt that I respect the god Osiris, even though my name is Seti. Now, we already talked about Karnak and the great work of the king at Karnak, but here are some more pictures showing us the great columns of the Karnak. Another important temple is the mortuary temple of the king. And we noticed since we started studying the architecture of the 18th dynasty that now the new kingdom is different than it was in the old kingdom. In the old kingdom, the king had a pyramid, the king had a funerary temple, a mortuary temple, and the valley temple, and all was called the complex, the funerary or the pyramid complex of the king. Probably the Egyptians thought that this tradition that lasted till the Middle Kingdom, till the 12th dynasty, probably they thought that it helps thieves or robbers to find the tomb and rob it. So they decided to change by hiding the tomb in the Valley of the Kings and keeping the temple far from it. Not so far, but at least not exactly near. So this is why the king rebuilt his temple at Korna, outside the Valley of the Kings, not too far, but outside the Valley of the Kings, and that's the beautiful mortuary temple of King Seti I. So be sure to make difference between the temple at Abydos, which is a temple of millions of years, and the temple of the mortuary temple at Korna. Now, we will talk about the beautiful tomb, but let's first have a picture or have a look at the cachet, the Deir al-Bahari cachet that we talked about in our last lecture, where we believe the mummy of Ramses I originally was found there before it went to Niagara Falls. Here again, in DB 320 was found the mummy of the great Seti I. Of course, again, it was discovered in 1881 when Maspero was the head of the Antiquities Service in Egypt, and again, divine help of the family of Abd al-Rasul. Well, the tomb itself was found with a few artifacts, but as we mentioned, not the mummy. It is considered probably the longest, or at least one of the longest tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Here we go. Let's see. Stairway leading to a corridor, leading to a stairway, leading to a corridor, leading to a shaft or a well, and another corridor. Then a stairway going down and a room on the side. Then again another corridor, and then again another corridor, a room, a burial chamber, and the chapel or shrine right behind the burial chamber, in addition to the side rooms. All these corridors and walls were decorated with seats, all of them at the side rooms and the burial chamber and everything. Now let's have a look at some of those seats. Here is the beautiful burial chamber of the king. As you see, it is so special. When we study archaeology, we will notice the beautiful astronomical figures on the ceiling of this room. It looks like a ball. Unfortunately, the sarcophagus itself is not there. It's all decorated with beautiful colors and beautiful reliefs. However, the family of Abd al-Rasul, shortly after the discovery of this tomb, not very shortly because the tomb was again discovered by Belzoni in 1817, the same year when we discovered the tomb of Ramses I. During this year, he actually found a beginning of a tunnel, but he did not dig so much in it. Later on, in the 1880s, the family of Abd al-Rasul, after the discovery of the cachet of Deir al-Bahari, would claim that one of them had a dream, and that in his dream they saw a corridor at the end of the tomb of Ramses II, of Seti I, and that this corridor is filled with treasures. Okay, the authorities decided to believe them. They know better than anyone. And so they started digging and digging and digging for meters and meters and meters, and found very few artifacts and no treasures. Did the family of Abd al-Rasul excavate this corridor before? Did they take what was already in there? It is probable. What is the function of this corridor? We don't really know. Did the king intend to make his tomb longer and longer, but when he died, they finished up with the burial chamber? We also don't know. Did the king intend to indicate the way to the kingdom of Osiris? Probably. However, maybe one day you will find the reason why there is such a corridor in the tomb. Here is the entrance to this corridor, and here is the mummy that is today in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Here we go. As you see, we have here Seti, Mary, and Adah, Men Matra. Remember at the beginning of the lecture, I told you that the name of the king with Set was sometimes replaced by other gods. Here we see an example where Set replaced by Osiris. It's still called Seti, but he placed Osiris in his name, so we have here Seti, Mary, and Petah, Men, Ma'at, Ra. And one of the best preserved mummies of ancient Egyptian Museum. And while it looks like he's just sleeping, or it looks like probably he's asleep, it's a very well preserved mummy of the king. I mentioned to you that we don't have the sarcophagus of the king here in Egypt because unfortunately it is in Stone Museum, which is a museum in London where it was